Hello chess friends and welcome to your out of chess channel and welcome back to the Julius Baer Generation Cup in 2022. So we're following now the last day of the preliminaries. We're following now a beautiful gameplay by Magnus Carlsen and Christopher Yoo. Christopher Yoo is actually here the youngest player in this event, but he also reached the quarterfinal stage, so we'll see also Christopher Yoo in the continuation of the tournament, which is really, I think, a great thing for chess. Christopher Yoo is only 15 years old, and when it comes to the oldest player and the youngest player, the difference between the two of them is actually 39 years, because Christopher Yoo is, as I said, 15 years old and Boris Gelfand is 54 years. So a really remarkable difference. I think that's the beauty about this event. That's really a special tournament for us, watching Boris Gelfand, for instance, playing against Christopher Yoo. Amazing idea to organize such a beautiful event. So I'll talk about the current standings and also about the future progress of this event at the end of the video. I think the most important question for us is actually when is Hans Niemann meeting maybe Magnus Carlsen in a potential game. They're not meeting immediately in the quarterfinal stage. I'll explain you when they actually could meet in this Julius Baer continuation in the knockout stage. Now so far in the quarterfinals they're not playing against each other immediately because Hans Niemann finished on the third place. But as I said, we'll talk about the current standings and, as I said, about the future of the tournament in the later stage of this video. So let's see now what happened in this game, Magnus Carlsen versus Christopher Yoo. It was a remarkable game, really, with great tactical ideas for both sides. So here Magnus opened with the move d4. Christopher Yoo played here knight to f6. We have c4, and after move e6 we have knight to c3, bishop to b4. We have now the Indian defense on the board. So Magnus played now a3, the so-called same-ish variation. There are many things that you can play, but Magnus chooses now this one. He challenged now Christopher Yoo immediately. We have bishop to c3, b takes c3. And okay, when we watch now the pawn structure, this is a messed up pawn structure. You have given up your bishop pair from black's perspective, but at least you provoked this c4 c3 double pawn structure. But I think still that white has here a great compensation, although this is not a really healthy pawn structure. But now with f3 e4, the bishop will come out, knight to h3, knight to f2. You have still great ideas to develop your pieces. So here the pawn center that white gets here with f3 e4 is sometimes something that bothers, of course, black also in the continuation of the game. So we have now kingside casting, f3, preparing now the move e4. Now knight to h5, an interesting idea by Christopher Yoo, because he's threatening now to play an annoying queen to h4, because if that happens, then of course j3 you cannot play, because you get knight takes g3, h takes g3, and then you lose maybe the rook here on h1. So far this is not working here for white. So that's why Magnus has to play now this move, knight to h3. Of course queen to h4 is not so risky anymore, because still you have this defensive resource, you have still this beautiful move, knight to f2. So in the continuation, after move knight to h3, Christopher Yoo played now the move f5. We have bishop to g5 attacking the queen, queen to e8, and now an interesting choice here by Magnus Carlsen, really an aggressive idea, g4 immediately. And Magnus Carlsen already played this opening line against Alexander Morozevich, and we have here already a difference in the approach. Here Christopher Yoo played the move knight to f6, which is still nothing wrong, it's a perfectly fine move. But in the game between Magnus Carlsen and Morozevich played here actually f takes g4. The game led into this f takes g4, knight to f6, and now with queen to d3 Magnus pulled off here a wild line, tried to sacrifice here the pawn, but in order of course to open maybe the g file and create a massive attack against black's king. So this is really an interesting line for sure. As you see, white is here a beautiful development with the minor pieces, but has also a little bit a naked king, and even if you castle queenside here, you have some weaknesses here. So as I said, it's really double-edged opening for both sides. So here, as we said, after move pardon me, after move g4, Christopher Yoo played knight to f6. We have g takes f5, e takes f5, and now rook to g1 again by Magnus Carlsen. So again he's trying to open somehow the g file, and now of course there are some threats of bishop to h6. It's quite interesting, because if you try g6 then you could maybe lose the rook on f8. So here Magnus is playing already a wild idea. So I'm not saying maybe this is when it comes to computer evaluation, this is maybe not the suggested line that white should play, but it's, I think, the most most interesting line. Look at this, everything is messed up here. Black is also lacking in development, but I'm really unsure how white is going to protect the king here in the center of the board. So here in the continuation, we have now the move d6. Christopher Yoo is trying to develop further pieces, which is perfectly fine. Knight to f4, played by Magnus. Knight to c6, developing of course another piece, and now king to f2. And this is really interesting by Magnus. So he secured the king like this, and this is in my opinion perfectly fine. This is really great what Magnus is doing, because you have maybe several dark square problems here in front of the king, but actually you have still the bishop on the board, so you still have the dark square bishop, which is your key protector of dark squares. And black doesn't have any more the dark square bishop, because black gave up in the beginning of the Nimzo in the defense. They gave up the bishop for a knight, so actually white cannot face so many dark square problems, but still it's a weird position I think of the king. The king on f2 still could be a little bit in danger by some activities of black. So we have now knight to h5 here by Christopher Yoo, although there is maybe a better line. Knight to e7 here makes really sense. Then you get this knight into the game, then you are trading off further pieces, then you can play maybe something like bishop to d7, bishop to c6, continue the pressure. Maybe it was simply time to include sort of a new defender into the game, but okay, he played knight to h5. Here in the continuation, Magnus played c5, and this was again an interesting move here by Magnus, because he's trying not to play e3 and bishop to c4. When we think about this pawn structure, look at this, the light square bishop was a little bit blocked out by its own pawn structure, so that's why Magnus sort of sacrificed the pawn just in order to get this bishop somehow into the game, because every other piece of Magnus Carlsen is perfectly fine. Look at this, the bishop on g5 has a good activity, the knight on f4, the rook is on g file, the queen, although it didn't move so far, but still the queen can come into the game very, very fast, so it doesn't matter, the queen is always active. So the only piece that needs to be activated is, as I said, the light square bishop on f1, so that's why a brilliant idea here by Magnus Carlsen to pull off the move c5. So we have now e3 by Magnus, so he's saying I still have a good center, pawn center, he has still the pawn center control, and he's threatening now a wild idea, the move bishop to c4. Notice that also the knight is controlling the e6 square, so you cannot actually cover with your bishop here on e6, so it's actually a huge tactical threat here by Magnus Carlsen. So we have king to h8. Christopher Yoo is getting out of the range of the bishop, out of the potential range, of course, if the bishop comes on c4. We have bishop to c4 anyway by Magnus Carlsen, and now h6, kicking away the bishop. We have knight to h5, and now queen to h5. You cannot take the bishop here on g5, because rook to g5 is going to happen, and the knight is protected. The g7 is weak. We can even include maybe the queen into the game. Maybe we can play somewhere with the queen on the h file, and the king is naked here. I think this is game over here for black, so this is not the way to go. So after move knight to h5, we have queen to h5. Now Magnus has to retreat with bishop to f4, and now comes, in my opinion, one of the critical moments of the game. I said in one moment of this game that actually Christopher Yoo had sort of a lack of development. The bishop didn't play so far, the rook didn't play so far, and actually here Christopher had, I think, the opportunity to maybe I'm not saying destroy Magnus Carlsen immediately, but I think Magnus Carlsen would have for sure an unpleasant game if Christopher Yoo would have played a simple continuation. And it's really hard to play this quiet move. This would be a perfect move, the move bishop to d7, and it seems strange. Basically you didn't do special things, but actually the beauty about the move bishop to d7 is that you connected the rooks, and now both of these rooks can come into the game. Look at this, what would have actually happened if, for instance, Christopher Yoo would have played the move bishop to d7. Magnus, I think, has to take out, for instance, this pawn on c7, because you are really vulnerable, because the huge threat is always, even if you stay with your bishop here on f4, the huge threat is, for instance, to get this pawn g5. Here bishop to c7, let's see, you simply take, and now with f4 you're breaking here the position immediately. Look at this, even if you try bishop to f4, I think that black can even sacrifice here. Rook to f4, look at this, e takes f4, now queen to h2, this rook is coming into the game. So that's why I think it's very important to remove the bishop from the 8th rank, just in order to include this other rook into the game. That would be, I think, the beauty about this sequence. But after move bishop to f4, Christopher Yoo played still the second best move. I think it's nothing wrong also with his moves. He still has a better position. He played now the move g5, but I really would have liked more if he would have included simply more pieces into the attack, because you can always play the move bishop g5 in order to attack the bishop. So as I said, here maybe a tiny little inaccuracy accurate move here by Christopher Yoo. So bishop to c7, now Magnus took the pawn. We have now f4, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. It's not the same position. Again, Christopher Yoo played the same motifs, but the rooks are not connected. You cannot actually include this other rook into the game very, very easily. That's, I think, the huge problem here in black continuation. So we have now e takes f4 by Magnus. We have queen to h2 by Christopher Yoo. Okay, this is still dangerous, but Magnus Carlsen calculated this very, very well. He played rook to g2, protecting the king, queen to h4, and look at this now. The king is perfectly fine here. The bishop is still securing the dark squares. You cannot take with the rook, of course. Now, as we said, this other rook is not in the game. The other rook is not participating in the attack. That's, I think, the main problem. And now there are some threats of rook to h2 attacking the queen. The king is also here on the h file, so Magnus Carlsen got it out, and he is now he has now here a better position than black. So in the continuation, bishop to h3, everything seems so dangerous here by black, pardon, but actually it's not, because rook to h2, you can maybe play just one check with the queen to g3, but again, nothing special is going to happen. King to h1, and now you cannot take out the pawn on f3. You can maybe take out this pawn with the g pawn, but I think in the near future we can expect some ideas of queen to e2, then rook to g1, and look at this. This is now a devastating position here for black. So as I said, after move rook to h2, Magnus Carlsen got challenged with this move by Christopher Yoo. G takes f4, trying of course to liberate somehow the g file, but the cool part is actually here by white setup that Magnus Carlsen is controlling the g8, so never g8 is going to happen. So far a good defensive structure also here by Magnus. So king to h1, Magnus got out of the range anyway, out of the potential range on the g file, and now he's also pinning a little bit here the bishop to the queen. So we have rook from a to c8, and this was now, I think, the main mistake by Christopher Yoo. He has to break the pawn chain here. He has to open the position. He has to use now the momentum. He has now to make something out of this position in order to open somehow the d file, e file, in order to include more attackers into the game. Magnus would be forced probably to take here, c takes d4, and now maybe to attack the bishop, now maybe to trade off further pieces, and as we said, hope here simply for the best. Here, as I said, here black has to be challenged in this way. Bishop to e6 would be sort of a stockfish continuation. That here, for instance, this line is just the stockfish line that the engine is suggesting, but as I said, this is really wild. But here, after move rook from a to c8, it's simply too slow, because Magnus has now this one, bishop to d6. He's attacking now the rook. That's now the main issue here. Okay, Christopher Yoo played rook to f6, but now Magnus Carlsen played d takes c5, and you see Christopher Yoo had the opportunity to play c takes d4. Now he allowed d takes c5 by Magnus Carlsen. Look at this now. This bishop is the most powerful piece now in the center of the board, controls very important diagonals, and now the queen will come, of course, into the game. This other rook will come into the game, so it's now a completely winning endgame here for white. So in the continuation, we have rook to g6. So Christopher Yoo is now using this other rook into the game, but Magnus plays simply queen to e2. Again, I'm pointing out rook to g8 is never an opportunity, because the bishop is controlling this very important square. So we have queen to g3, we have rook to e1, we have rook to g5, and now after move queen to f2, Magnus is slowing down the pace of the game. He's simplifying now the game, because he's understanding that if he trades off the queens of the board, then he has defended this position, and then he can go for this pawn. This is a weakness. Then he can go also for this pawn. This pawn is also weak, so everything is here messed up in black's position. So we have now queen to f2, rook takes f2, bishop to d7, rook to h2, h5, and now Magnus Carlsen played rook to g1, forced trades of rooks, and look at this. As we said, both pawns are hanging, and basically this is game over. So bishop to e8, rook to g2. Magnus includes now this other rook into the game. We have b6, and now rook to g8, an annoying check here that Christopher Yoo has to handle. We have king to h7, rook to g5, attacking now still this pawn, also controlling further the c5 square. So we have bishop to g6, we have bishop to b5, and now knight to a5. The problem is now you cannot even play this idea b takes c5, because you get paralyzed by this one. Rook to c5 would be simply a winning continuation here for white. You cannot escape. You cannot even play knight to the e7 in order to protect your rook, because you simply take out the knight and still you have your rook protected. The only defensive move in this position would be bishop to e8, but look at this. Now you cannot move any piece here in this position. Now white is just pushing the king towards the action, will eventually take out also this pawn. As I said, you cannot even move here. Something like knight to e7 is still not working, because now we play simply still this one. We can also take out the bishop, so everything is again here messed up here in black's position. So after move bishop to b5, here knight to a5 was played by Christopher Yoo, but now Magnus Carlsen simply includes the rook into the game, and he's now trying to deliver an annoying check here on e7. So we have knight to c6, rook to e6, we have b takes c5, now bishop to f4, we have a rook to g1 and rook to g8, pardon me, and now after king to f2, Magnus Carlsen got out of the potential range of the rook, because this was a really tiny little dirty trap here by Christopher Yoo, because if Magnus Carlsen would have taken here the pawn, pardon me, the knight on c6, then of course this would be the continuation. Bishop to f5 loses simply the exchange, and this would be a much better position now for black. So after move king to f2, here knight to d8 was played. We have rook to d6, we have bishop to f5, bishop to c4, attacking now the rook, rook to h8, and now after bishop to g5, you see the knight is out of game. This is really wild. The knight is paralyzed here. The knight doesn't have good squares. You have only one square to escape. Knight to b7, but now the bishop gets attacked. So you see the Magnus Carlsen is just using this tiny little threat here. He's just making black here react. So black never got out of this attack anymore, because bishop to c8, okay, you cannot play, you can play, but after move f4, Magnus Carlsen simply continued to push his pawn here. King to g7, he continued here the pressure. f5, h4, and after rook to f7, in this position, the young prodigy Christopher Yoo resigned here. What's the point? Why did he resign? Look at this. You have only one square. You have only the square g8 to escape with the king, and now you get this windmill tactic. Rook to c7. You have only again one square. Now we take out the bishop, and again you have only one square. That's the problem. The black king cannot escape. Again, you just deliver a check. Again, only one square that you can use, and now we simply take out the knight. Now you can maybe push the pawn further. Now we push also this one, and now it would lead into fourth checkmate with the move rook to b8. But as we said, after move rook to f7, in this position, black resigned. So great game by Magnus Carlsen. He really spiced it up. He really mixed it up in the beginning with some wild lines of this same-ish variation of the Nimzo Indian. As promised, I'm going to show you now the current standings after the first 4 days. So we have now this situation. So Magnus Carlsen is on the first place after this preliminaries. Look at this. Levon Aronian is now on the 8th place. So from the players from the first place till the 8th place will play in the knockout stage, and this means now that Magnus Carlsen will face Levon Aronian in the quarterfinals, which means also that Arjun Erigaisi is going to face Christopher Yoo also in the quarterfinals. Hans Niemann will play against Liem, and Vincent Keymer will play against Praggnanandhaa. Then look at this. The cool part, I think, for this tournament is that actually Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen can only face in the potential finals, because here Arjun Erigaisi will in the potential, I'm just saying, in the potential semifinals face Hans Niemann, and Praggnanandhaa will play against Magnus Carlsen in potential semifinals. So this is, I think, good thing for us. Maybe some things will be clear to the end of the tournament, and then maybe we'll know more, because Magnus Carlsen actually praised today Hans Niemann's game. So maybe this drama will end finally. I'm not sure, but I would really love to see maybe a super final between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, in which they play actually the 4 games. I would really love to see them play, not that Magnus Carlsen resigns or something. I really would love to see that. And as I said, it's a good thing for us. Then maybe we saw that Magnus Carlsen resigned in the preliminaries, so I would not love to see Magnus Carlsen resigning again against Hans Niemann. I really would love to see them play, and who is better should eventually win in the super final. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Interesting ideas of the Nimzo for sure. If you want to see more games from this chat event, check out my coverage so far with some other great games that we have seen. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.